Something's going on?
I don't know, but we missed them.
Yeah.
All right, so we begin with the meeting of the Board of Canvassers to certify the results of the general election for the 100th Assembly District. Is there a motion to approve the certification?
A motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so that carries, and we will sign the paperwork now to certify the election. It's just 2 sheets of paper, the certification and the canvas. Use this one.
Tough shape.
Times are tough.
And congratulations to Assemblyman Kerwin.
Just two to sign.
Yeah.
That's right.
For his landslide victory.
Good luck. It took a while. Well,
All right.
better late than never.
So that concludes the meeting of the Board of Canvassers. We'll now call to order the commissioners of the State Board. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes of December 23rd and January 19th. Is there a motion to accept the minutes as
So moved.
presented? Those in
Second.
favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right, it passes. And we'll have the unit updates. We'll start with the co-executive directors, Robert Brehm and Todd Valentine.
Some of the interesting items, we participated in the Election Commissioners Winter Conference in Rockland County. In addition to the foot of snow that fell during the conference, they had a nice crowd. Todd and I participated in the MOVE Act portion, and other people did different sessions, and we'll probably cover in their unit report. But I think the one thing that was universal in the communication was they were very satisfied with the vendor we picked and the work that Seidel did in order to help them through, because every deadline we had was at the last minute while they were extremely busy doing so many other items. And they did say that they thought they worked very well together, and it was very helpful to their ability to meet those deadlines and get the work done. So, one, it was nice to know that the vendor we picked was well received. We continue to have our conference calls with the counties and cover a number of items that they're of interest to them. There are 2 main items, I think: the shoebox program, which from our perspective, having heard so often that New York is last to do HAVA compliance, there has not been a lot of guidance from the EAC on how to meet the requirements of spending that extra money once you've certified compliance with Title III, or even how to certify compliance with Title III. We did the phone call Tuesday, the February 8th, and had not yet received the guidance from the EAC, but it came later that afternoon. But it's many years after it would have been helpful. But we're reviewing it in order to get the documentation filed so that the counties can start accessing that additional bit of money. One, they gave us guidelines on how to submit the documentation, but they still haven't really given us the guidelines that they promised over a year now in the making of how actually to run the shoebox program.
Right, that's still missing.
That's still missing. It would be very helpful to get that as soon as possible.
Would you explain the shoebox program, because people who watch this won't know what it is?
Well, the counties know because we've talked it, but that's a good point. Once the HAVA requires that we reserve the money that was available in HAVA to comply with 4 major components: replacement of voting system, statewide voter registration list, the HAVA complaint procedure, and fail-safe voting through affidavit voting. We always had affidavit voting, so that was an easy one to comply with. It took us till this fall to meet the replacement of the voting systems. So now that we have the guidelines, we can review and make sure we're complete, submit our paperwork to HAVA, and once that has been completed, we can use whatever HAVA funds have not been spent bringing us into compliance on other items that would further the administration of a federal election. We've been telling counties to, whatever other items that they need to spend money on, keep all of their documentation and put it in a shoebox. So that once...
Like the big shoebox, right?
Well, some of them have bigger shoeboxes than others. But once we get the guidelines from the Federal Election Assistance Commission, we could then do the best we could to reimburse them for as many receipts they had in the shoebox, assuming the EAC allows us to reimburse them for any of it. So we're not sure of their guidelines yet. They have not shared them. So we're waiting for that part of it. The other item, they had recommended that we work with a committee that the EAC would put together to help us to come up with the items that may be impacted by move related to when the primary and the general election take place, so the ballots can meet the federal 45-day transmission guidelines. So they identified 6 commissioners, well, 5 commissioners and Steve Brehm from the city of New York, and we had that preliminary phone call yesterday. So that was one of the items that was an action item from the last phone call. And Todd and I participated both in the NASED conference. FAP had a conference as we arrived. My flight, I got there for I think the last 15 minutes. Todd got to participate a little bit more in the FAP program. We both participated in the Overseas Vote Foundation conference on Thursday that was happening in another building nearby. And that was very well attended, and it was webcast, and I know people here commented how fine a job Todd and I did at our program.
If they do say so themselves.
Well, if they are thinking otherwise, they haven't said it yet.
It's now on the record.
And then Bob Howe and I serve as New York's reps on the Standard Board, and that conference was in Oklahoma City last week. And different things happened, but it wasn't as detail-oriented as I thought the Standards Board might have been.
Who thinks that's dangerous?
And one other item that I thought was of interest, we had a preliminary meeting with representatives of the Commission on Quality of Care, and I see Greg Jones is here, who participated with other members of the Commission on Quality of Care, and also representatives from the Catskill Center for Independence and Center for Independence for the Disabled in New York, Sydney, helping us as subject matter experts on implementing the Chapter 505 of the laws of 2010, which require just updating the program we already have in place for poll site accessibility. Since the governor signed the bill, it required all poll sites to be fully accessible in a period of time to transition in the existing sites. So we had that preliminary session, and we're looking forward to their input in a follow-up session.
Could I ask you what the technical guidelines development committee is? Are they developing guidelines, or are they already in place? Are they the ones that are in place, or are they bringing in new ones?
They do a little both. There was a report from the committee in NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, where it's a group that advises on what the standards should be, made up of both, state, local representatives, technology people, as to what the correct standards would be. Some of the work they are doing are creating standards to evaluate the MOVE Act wizard tools that they've come up with. Some of that was a concern that I know we talked about when we were implementing MOVE. Some of the programs they were putting in place had not been certified. So we did not use all the functionality of the Wizard tool that FF made available to us, one, because it had not been certified, and we were uncertain of how it would be working. But so they do a number of standards of the VVSG, reviewing the VVSG. They did make a point to say they're getting away from the year, the VVSG 2005, the VVSG 2007, because it's too confusing to them. And they're so far past 2007 that they now call the VVSG 2005 VVSG 1. The amendments they're making to that would be 1.1, and then the 2007 they're leading towards a version 2. But they still have.
That's a cosmetic change.
It's trying to keep track of all the comments, but they did have a comment period on what people thought needed to be done to improve the VVSG, and they are soon to release that version and have another round of comments that they hope, towards the fall they'll have. Well, it's pretty much the standards as we go forward for perhaps the next generation of machines. One of the items that was of concern is they're addressing to try and, they attempt to single out the accessibility related to paper-based systems, that their standard doesn't seem to be equally worded for non-paper-based systems. So like the Automark would have a different standard than I think you participated in the test we had here with like the phonovote system, as to whether they were looking at a standard that would say, once the voter marked the ballot using the ballot marking device, that there would not be a requirement to handle that paper ballot before it's scanned. And it was triggered to the paper world. But the phonovote system creates a paper ballot in states that use it on election day, which still has to be handled by an attendant, by someone, poll worker, in order to be canvassed. So they clearly, in the conversations, need to hear from people. What is an appropriate standard and what's the best way to word it? So they have those items out there. They were putting them out there and hoping that people would look at them, read them, think about them, and follow up with comments to them. So I think that would be helpful.
Back to the poll site accessibility, how would you characterize where we stand on that? Are there a lot of places that are not complying with the law? I know you said we have time to straighten that out. How bad of a problem is it? Greg Patrick had the list last. I think most counties have reported to us that they felt that they've completed the surveys, they've reviewed the surveys, and either through permanent improvements or temporary improvements that they have mitigated most of those items. I think New York City was down to 1 or 2 sites. But the language of the bill is pretty much says, directs the board to do certain other tasks, and I think most of it is just reviewing what we already have provided. Part of our 2006 settlement with the court, one of the early items we had to come up with was general guidelines for preparing for the election. A lot of the items are in that general guideline, so we've given some of those documents to our, the technical group to review and see if the things we need to update since 2006. We have the survey that we worked with the Commission on Quality of Care, the DOJ survey, to make sure it was compliant with New York State Code, and they confirmed for us again that it was. So we have the survey instrument. The only added item, I think, in the statute requires that those surveys be evaluated by someone who is, I didn't bring the statute language with me, but evaluated by someone familiar with accessibility. When we set out the program, we worked with the Commission on Quality Care, the Catskill Center, Sydney, and other groups like Paralyzed Veterans Group and others to encourage the counties to either work with those groups to do the surveys, review their plans, come up with a program. Better yet, we encourage them to use the monies that were available through Health and Human Service and HAVA to receive training from those groups on how to do the surveys yourself and what is required, so that if you had vacancies in the future. So we think we have most of the pieces together, and it shouldn't be that big a burden on the counties to just pull together an update and try and get it out to them as soon as possible. But mostly, the counties have reported that they thought that they were compliant. And if we're not if we don't have to change the survey instrument itself, then I think we're doing pretty well. We'll see. But I don't think it's that big a change for the counties. It's just an update to what we've been doing since 2006.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No, I think we'll plug it along.
Greg, did you want to say anything on that subject?
I don't really have anything to add other than that we're probably trying to include in the checklist provisions for where the BMDs and how they should be set up. There were some issues involving that. But other than that, I wouldn't have anything to add.
All right, then we'll, thank you, Greg. We'll turn to the legal report. Kimberly Galvin.
Thank you, Commissioner. In addition to the written comments that I provided to you, I think there's a couple of things that are worthy of stressing or notation. As you're aware, we are currently being monitored by the Department of Justice with regard to our compliance with the MOVE Act as it particularly pertains to our special and general elections. The Governor's Program Bill number 4 that he submitted with regard to moving the timetables for the special election passed the Senate this morning and passed the Assembly yesterday, so I would imagine that will be signed into law. It was his bill, so I can't imagine he's going to have a problem with it, but in time, obviously, for the vacancy in the 26th Congressional District, should he choose to do that. So we've been answering a lot of questions on the implications of that bill, not only as it pertains to any congressional special that may be called, but also with the looming assembly specials, of which there are currently, I think, possibly 2, and perhaps a third one that's coming down the pike. So people have a lot of interest in that, as well as the discussions, both internal, external, with the Department of Justice ahead of our April 1st reporting date concerning any progress that the board has made in effectuating change regarding the timetables for the elections that are forthcoming to ensure the compliance. And we've had many conversations with people, and the staff itself has developed a series of plans, and we're in the process of merging our recommendations together, and we've also talked with the county commissioner group on that, as well as, you know, people that we know inside and outside the building. So as Paul and I report to the Department of Justice on April 1st, again, I think it's critical that we keep emphasizing the monitoring of it and making the point that they are watching, and we need to do what we need to do in order to try to get some compliance there. Let's see. Other than that, in addition to the written comments, we did work with campaign finance staff, and we put in a regulation, a consensus regulation to reflect the increase in the campaign finance limits that I believe has been moved to the Secretary of State's office from Gore. And I too have had, as the agency ethics officer, have had a few conversations with the Public Integrity Commission, both on ensuring compliance with our ethical training for those people that were required to do it under the governor's order, as well as in preparation for the financial disclosure filing that we all have to start thinking about it. That will come to the forefront very quickly. I'm formulating the list now, and there are some new additions and new people, and so I'll be notifying you as soon as the first time I can with regard to when that filing is available. May 15th is the deadline, so we have plenty of time, but something we all need to be aware of.
Kim, I must be honest with you, or maybe I was asleep or something. That's the first time I heard that. Is it we have to give people ethical training?
the governor's office puts on training through the Commission on Public Integrity.
Oh, all right.
And certain people, certain staff people are required to attend.
Oh, I see. I'm completely misunderstood.
No, I'm
what you
sorry.
said.
So we
Yes.
clarified with the governor's staff
Yes.
who in this agency needed to go and by what date, and
I
we
thought
did all do
We had
it.
to give ethical training.
No,
I was
no,
going to
no.
say, where do we have, what can we point to as our being able to train people? Not that we're not ethical people, don't get me wrong.
I don't think they want us to be the
I guess I
teachers
start
of
with
it.
your diocesan training.
I think with my 25 years with the Diocese of Brooklyn, I could give some ethical training. No, please.
No, but we did that. We're required to put things in our files now, our personnel files, and so it's just, it's obviously, as the governor promised.
Really, in personnel files?
Yeah. Attesting to the training and the certification of it.
Oh, okay, that you had the training.
So,
I thought maybe on your ethical positions on certain things.
they do seem to be a lot more active
Yes.
in that department recently, so it's good. So we're doing whatever we need to do on that front. That's just something that a lot of people aren't aware of. Other than that, Paul, you
It's
got
not
any-
the training that's in question, it's the applying of the training that's the question.
That is certainly true.
Right. I went to college with a lot of people who took ethics.
And since we are at the Board of Elections, which we have sort of a unique atmosphere
Yes.
here, it makes it an interesting line.
Yes, it
But
does.
I think we're all doing all right. So.
It's important, I'm not saying it's unimportant, I just thought how they were going to, I thought if we had to give the training, how are we going to work that out? I misunderstood,
No.
yes, yeah, all right, thank you.
Kim, at our last meeting, we talked about changing the reporting period on HAVA compliance.
Yeah,
Have there been
you know,
discussions on that?
There were discussions, I drafted a letter, I talked with Paul, obviously, and Jeff DeVoren and Brian Heffernan, and we just haven't filed it. It is drafted, but I'll do that this week to the court.
Anything else, Paul?
The motions to dismiss the Nassau County case have been scheduled for March 18th, the return date of the motions to dismiss. The court may or may not take oral argument on that day or at all. Other than that, that's...
Okay, thank you very much. We'll turn to election operations. Anna Svizzero.
Thank you, Commissioner. Aside from our written report, we don't have too much to add. I can let you know that we are still expecting source code findings from ES&S's software submissions. Those are being reviewed by Wiley. Those are being tested by Wiley, and they'll be submitted to SysTest. That has not happened yet, but we're expecting that to happen at some point during this month. We've made it clear that the end of March is a hard deadline for us. Dominion understands that deadline as well, and we've confirmed with them that their software will be delivered by the end of the month for all of those issues. We will then do the same thing, have software source code reviewed. We intend to do all the functional testing here at the State Board for a number of reasons. So our staff right now is putting those test plans together. We'll use some of the test cases from the original certification. We'll be building those elections and producing ballots so that we can conduct that functional testing here. It's more expedient, it's more cost effective, and I think that we'll get a quality product in the process. We have not heard about a central count system from ES&S, although Dominion continues to assert that they'll be delivering one to us again by the end of March. So we're expecting certification efforts on both of those fronts shortly thereafter. I don't have anything in addition to report on that score, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Anna, we had this separate item for election operations to update on ballot redesign and usability.
I'll defer to Joe on that. Joe and Phil Jorzak from our unit are the two designees with those responsibilities now. So
we've been communicating with a few different usability experts to look at potential training and/or workshops for the staff here. And I think we're up to 3 that we've gotten estimates from at this point, with one of those 3 had stated that they could get us additional experts to talk to about training. And in the weeks ahead, we'll be hopefully trying to line up one or another as a potential trainer for the staff.
And so do I understand now that Phil Jorzak really has been assigned the responsibility to be the board's usability officer, or the liaison with the county boards on usability issues? Is that a done deal now?
I guess I would say he's been working on this. I don't want to speak where I shouldn't speak or give somebody a designation that I shouldn't give them. But
Well, I've been railing away for the last 4 or 5 meetings about the need for somebody to be designated with that job responsibility.
We designated Joe and Phil to do those 2 things, but Phil has been reaching out to the entities, gathering information and that kind of thing. So Phil is going to be our staff level go-to guy. But we did want 2 people to have that responsibility so that if one was ever out, or, they look at things from 2 different perspectives, there was certainly all the nuances would be absorbed by both people. And we have more than one resource at the state board. Having one person here that knows that thing is never good for us. We need that to be 2 people. So, but Phil is clear on his mission, as I'm sure Joe is. I will speak to that point of your conversation.
That's good. I'm glad this is moving along. And I also appreciated that you distributed the ballot formats that you'd collected, you collected a couple hundred ballots from around the country. And having all those examples was very helpful to look at that, to compare what other jurisdictions are doing. And then on certification issues, election operations is also working up this year's modifications. Anna, you want to just talk about what exactly what the state of that project is now, and what the projected timeline is?
We do have 2 lists of functional changes that will be reflected in the software that's being looked at right now on the ESNS side, and that will be looked at in the Dominion package that's being delivered. We had talked about sending maybe an inquiry to the county boards. I don't want to inundate them with all of the technical information that's provided to us, but perhaps ask the county boards, outside the issues relating to ballot font size and the lines widths between contests, et cetera, that we ask them for to give us a list of any additional functionality or some other feature that they would find helpful in that system, and at least we could have a working document moving forward. So we can send that information, that request out through the election ops email box. New York City has submitted a rather lengthy list of system requirements that they have, but we do have a change management process that requires that we review them, and de minimis ones we approve and major ones you would approve as a board. So we have reminded ESNS that there is a change management process, and we'll acknowledge receipt of the list from New York City and explain that change management process to them as well. And we can share that rather lengthy list with you if you like. We're happy to do that.
Well, I think that there are people who would be interested in that. And on the list of modifications that we've been talking about, we're talking about how the Canvas reports are printed out for ES&S.
The election result tapes, yes.
And then we're also talking for both systems to develop a more usable system for accessing the ballot images, and perhaps printing out all of the ballot images so that they could be distributed.
We have had that conversation with Dominion initially, and we will be having that conversation with the SNS. We haven't yet had the chance to do that, but that is on our list, yes.
And then you're also talking to the vendors about changing the voter notification screens for overvotes, right?
Yes, that is part of the conversation related to that litigation.
All right. And what's the schedule now for finalizing? I assume we want to do this in one list so that this is one project that can be certified at once? And what's the schedule?
We can assume not much, I think, in that regard. We have some time and cost estimates from the vendors related to the draft screens that were provided, but without a definitive answer as to what they have to do. That work and that clock won't start ticking until that point in time, and today is March 3rd. So
we need to get that done, and then to finalize what these other modifications are going to be.
yes.
And could I suggest that that really needs to be done with budget estimates by our next meeting in mid-April?
Very good.
And that, the commissioners should have a budget presented to them, and then the choice of what modifications we want to move forward with by that time. Because I'm concerned that if we don't get it done by then, we're never going to be able to finish it in time for this year's elections.
It's going to be expensive.
Okay. So we move to public information. John Conklin.
Afternoon, Commissioners. I just have two things to add to the written report. Now that you've certified the results for the 100th Assembly District, we posted those to the website this morning. Also, the NVRA unit completed site visits this week to Hamilton, Clinton, Franklin, and St. Lawrence counties. That's Patrick and Greg in our unit, and Terry Breeds was part of that as well, separately. As far as I know, they went very well, but we'll review those visits, and if there's any changes that need to be implemented, they'll be taken care of. Unless you have anything to add, Patrick.
No.
So, and that's it.
Could I ask you a question?
Yep.
You met with the Center for Independence for the Disabled People. Now, was there anything that you learned there that is particularly egregious that's happening at the polls that was brought up? Anything that we really should know about?
Well, that's the same meeting that Bob was at that he mentioned in his unit report. I personally was not there because I've been out on medical leave for a few weeks.
Oh, you weren't there. Oh, okay.
So,
All right,
but
then
Bob
maybe-
was there. Greg Jones was there. That I think either one of them could
I'd like to hear
answer.
what might have been presented
And-
to us as a
Oh, I'm sorry. And Tom Connolly was there as well. I'm sorry. I couldn't remember if that was before or after you started.
I don't want us to ignore.
So my deputy would be happy to answer any questions for you.
He just came on the job. I don't want us to ignore any problems that might be out there for the handicapped. I think we have to address them as well as everything else. So who wants to speak? Everybody.
Tom, what are the most significant issues with respect to disability access that need to be addressed at this point?
New York City has its own peculiar issues.
Tom, could you speak a little louder?
New York City has-
Greg, I'm sorry.
New York City has its own peculiar problems, which I think everybody is aware of. I can tell you this, we finished the vote survey that we did under the EAID vote grant. And I can tell you that at the very least statewide, the biggest number of good to excellent ratings was in the poll site accessibility category. So I think that's really a feather in the caps of not only the state board, but the local boards. They've done a very good job. Obviously, there are some problems that exist in particular poll sites, which we're going to try and address through the training that we're doing and these the survey that we're going to modify a little bit. But I think that we're going to be in good shape. Even on their own survey, Sydney, by the way, if you wanted to look at it, they do have their survey online. And there were some particular issues at particular locations. But by and large, there's been great improvement.
Well, one of the items that Sydney mentioned that they thought would be helpful
the county boards train the inspectors early on, they do the surveys early on, but there are nuances that happen after they built the building and selected it, and by the time it's election day. So they recommended, and Greg mentioned earlier, recommending an election day checklist of the kind of things, just to make sure, a reminder, so that somebody has them. And we put it in our training that the manual and the SOE training that we've come up with, things to look at on election day. To it, one, if it's something that's a problem, alert the board, but two, if it's a minor item, try and find a way. If somebody puts something in the way, if the path from the door to the polling site, if you can get the custodian to move it, or you can deal with it before it turns into somebody being injured, the list. So they had recommended a checklist, and we said certainly we'd be happy to look at something and maybe incorporate it in the plan. It made a lot of sense.
We were going to add a section for the poll workers themselves, kind of as a last defense, as Bob is pointing out, to obstacles that might have been placed from the time it might have been surveyed or when it's not used as a poll site. I thought the last line of defense is the poll workers coming in the morning perhaps could move the garbage can that's blocking the hall or whatever it might be. Some of the people, a component in that survey checklist to deal with those issues also.
Well, one of the things I noticed going around with Bob, and I guess because I have arthritis in one of my knees, I noticed it down, that the handicapped entrance sometimes is twice as far from the polling place than anything else. And it's a long walk to get to, and then it's a long walk once you're inside. But I don't know, since the buildings were built the turn of the century, I don't know if anything can be done about that.
We do have to deal with a lot of old building issues, obviously, New York State in particular.
Well,
we have a lot of
especially I'm in
buildings that
Brooklyn,
work.
and we were in
I
Brooklyn,
think even,
Queens.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
We were in Brooklyn and Queens that day mostly,
Well, most of the complaints in that regard really dealt with signage and not knowing where the accessible entrance was, if it wasn't in the front of the building. There were some comments about that, of not knowing where
You had to go look for it, that's true. That's true, I saw that too, yes.
And that's going to be one of the elements, obviously, in the survey, signage.
I just wanted to put it out in the open in case, we'll start to think about it.
Thank you, I appreciate your concern.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. Elizabeth Hogan for Campaign Finance.
Thanks, Commissioner. Good afternoon. I submitted pretty much the unit report in the same format that I usually do, so that I can just plug in the continuing kind of information that you can have at your disposal relative to what we're doing in campaign finance. There's a couple of issues that I just did want to highlight. One of them, you'll notice in the report, the high number of non-filers of the January periodic. There were over 5,500 filers who didn't file, and that had some type of action had to be taken relative to, and that included the statutory requirement that we mail a number of letters to candidates and treasurers, and we subsequently did create an order to show cause to go forward in the lawsuit, and the numbers were down certainly significantly because a lot of people file, but that whole process to get the numbers down to 300, what was it, 300? It was 530 who actually were on the order to show cause. I just wanted you to be aware of those kind of numbers, and with the budget considerations that we're always having, I want you to be aware that suing for the January periodic and those numbers, what it will cost, and our estimate is it costs upwards of $25,000 to sue for that non-filing. So I just want you to be aware of that place in the budgetary issues. As Kim mentioned, the 4-year recalculation of campaign finance contribution limits that appears in 6214 of our reg was due for February 1st. I was out of the office for a few weeks, and Kim picked up the ball and proceeded with getting that reg done. I appreciate it very much, and as she said, it is at the Department of State, so it's a consensus reg. We expect there to be no public comment on it, as the comment would only relate to the manner in which we calculated, and we use the CPI published by the government, so we expect that will be routine. The other thing I wanted to point out, because it's been a concern, especially raised by you, Commissioner Kellner, is the issue with the software. I wanted to make you aware that, we've been made aware by IT that the software that we're working on, in response, I think specifically a number of years ago, the usability for Mac computer users to make it compliant. I wanted you to be aware when we learned it of the implication of the use of these mobile devices like iPads and the inability to use those kind of devices when people are giving up traditional computers, even laptops, the inability to use those mobile devices because they don't use software, they use applications, the ability to use those for filing. And with the number of people using those kind of devices instead of computers, they are not accessible. Our filing is not able to be done on those things, and those things would require web-based filing. I just wanted to bring it to your attention as soon as we were aware of it. So.
And so what are we doing to address it?
Well, I can tell you that we've been working on the software, and the work that we're doing there is not for naught. I mean,
Right.
it is being very productive. We've also been told by IT that the software that they're developing can be adapted for a web-based application. Where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, is that there's a significant hardware and software implication, because when you're looking at 11,000+ filers, A, to data farm, and B, to have the software capability to allow 11,000 people to all show up on the same day because they need to make their filing, that is a significant thing. So I think, when talking with Bob and Todd, we clearly need to develop a true sense of, well, how much does that cost? We know tangentially, we know, and speaking about it, we know that there's, and George has made no secret about it, that there is a significant cost that would be associated with the data farm and the software, plus staffing concerns. But clearly, to have something that is current as you can be, because software by its very nature, the minute you come out with it, is already out of date in some fashion. But clearly, the software that we're developing now, which is updated to what we have in the system, is not the direction we need to go. But there's a cost that needs to come from that. So,
And we've asked for a number of years for the funding to do an assessment of what it would take to implement a web-based filing system. And again, we put a figure in this year's budget for money to proceed with the kind of analysis. So there are several issues, budgetary issues. One is the initial analysis of, well, what do we need? And the second issue would be a procurement to provide the implementation of that. So it's going to cost some money to do it, but it's really, we find ourselves in a really difficult spot because, we're as Bill said, the software update isn't for naught, because Mac users, computer users that will address their inability to file. And also, the design of the software is such that it makes filing easier and more common sense, and it also makes it easier from our perspective in assessing the filings. But it does not address this issue of the web-based filing, which I think is going to get more and more significant as more and more people use these mobile devices to the exclusion of old computers. So.
All right, well, I appreciate the report and that you're working on it, and that we have put the proposals for consideration in the budget, and obviously others will make the decision on the budget. But at least we've laid out what needs to be done so that the governor and the legislature can decide whether this is important enough for them to devote the resources to it.
I think we absolutely should, but could I ask you one question? Do you have any idea what percentage of people are filing that way, using iPads?
Well, nobody is filing in that way because
But their
we don't have.
information is.
Well, we don't have a web-based system, and so nobody can use
Nobody
an
can
iPad.
use it. Oh, yeah.
They
Okay.
must use either a desktop or a laptop computer because they need to use our software. They need to
But they
actually
want to
go
use
into our
their
software.
iPad. They would prefer to use others.
Yes, because it's easier to file on the web, and and that's the direction.
Right now, you
we're
have to
going
have Microsoft
technologically.
Windows.
I have Windows, but all my grandchildren have their iPads. I understand exactly what you mean.
It's hard to stay current with technology because the iPad 2 came out yesterday, but the iPad came out not that long ago, and people considering keeping the most current technological item, they suggest that the iPad 3 will be out by Christmas.
But that's still going to be an apps.
So it's very difficult for government to keep up with the latest technology. Our hope is to finish this project, to bring it to the last, well, it's not even the last, it's the Mac technology, because so many users use Mac.
But the other problem.
And if we stop to pick up every new one, I mean, there's two issues. Finish what we're doing
Yes.
as quickly as we can.
So afraid it'll
And
be
then,
obsolete by then,
You know, there's the whole issue of whether people outside the building, the legislature, advocacy groups calling for changes to reform campaign finance, whatever may or may not happen, we know we have a system that was designed in 1990s and needs a lot of work to be accessible to a lot of people. And, you know, it has to compete with funds that just don't seem to be around right now. So whatever they decide our responsibilities will be, we continue to identify in any of our conversations with advocacy groups and legislative leaders and budget people that this is something that we need to find some money in order to, one, research what it's not doing and how best to come up with a system that will do what it needs to do. And then that's just the research phase, and then the implementation money. So those are two items that I don't think we have a big chance of right now getting because there is no money, but we've identified that repeatedly.
My
The
grandson
other-
has something that's about this big. He got it for his birthday last month, and he can move anything. And I don't know what information he has on him, but it is unbelievable. What time was a certain person, the King of France, boom, boom, he's got it. What time, I mean, it's beyond the iPad. It's the thing, the next, do you know what they call it?
Android.
Huh?
iPads.
iPhones.
There.
But the other thing,
He can do anything with it. It's unbelievable.
aside from the web-based issue, which goes to the use of the mobile devices and things like that, aside from that, there was the issue that came up that was really rather frightening and luckily got resolved, was that apparently Apple, our software is written in Java. Now, I am no tech person, but it's written in this Java, which is this language, whatever. Yeah. But the issue that came up was that Apple was going to stop supporting Java. And therefore, if that had happened and it was averted at the last minute by, I guess, Steve Jobs signed some kind of an agreement that they would, for now, continue to support Java. But if they don't, that's going to wipe out all of the Mac users then. So I don't know where we're...
Here's the fundamental issue is this, and the handheld devices as a convenience method, the web-based application applies to any computer. As long as you have access to the internet, you have access to a web-based application. But here's the thing. When we have the software fully developed, and the implementation is really where, from our standpoint, is now you have to implement it, you have to educate filers on what the differences are. There's an actual cost to field place the software. But it's the public perception at the end of the day, the state of New York will come out with something that isn't even remotely current, but it's going to be out of date, and it'll just be another example of the state doing something, and, well, gee, that's great. You might as well just keep what you have now if you're really not moving the ball down the field all that much more from a practical standpoint.
Bill, you're moving the ball down the field, all right? Right now, you have a system that can only be accessed through Microsoft Windows. You're almost finished with a system that will expand the number of users who can access it significantly. Finish that. You've put in the request for the budget to do the next step, and that's a decision that's above our pay grade. So,
No, there's no question that it'll be beneficial, but I'm just saying that it's still
right.
where people are going to say, well, great.
we recognize the limitations, but we're doing what we can to move forward. And
Well, this was just to
the key thing
make
is
you
the
aware.
priority within the agency to keep the old system functioning, even though it's being held together with chewing gum and spit. And the fact is that with all those limitations and with the very substantial decrease in personnel, you've kept the system working so that the public can at least get access to the information that is filed. All right. Next is information technology. George Stanton is out sick today, but we do have his written report, and I think we've already discussed the main issues with his unit anyway. You could put it either under information technology or under old business. We had the issue of carrying over the Green Party enrollments. Is that now resolved, that we've come to consensus on this?
Yeah, no, it's been resolved. I mean, it's not finished, obviously, because it's in process, because our delay was, part of the delay at this point is just getting the contractor on board to make the correct changes so that we can do the batch updates. And then, we have a draft to send out to the counties that we put together to notify them. Obviously, we approved the voter registration form, so that's now in place. The translations are being done.
All right, well, I just want to confirm then that the commissioners have made this policy decision that persons who were registered as not enrolled in any party, but who had listed as green as their preference, will be automatically updated to be enrolled in the Green Party, and I guess you had talked about sending them a notice that change was
Yeah, I
going to
think we
take
have an
place.
obligation, but that's part of the normal process anyway. It's a slight wrinkle with these only because of their status.
I just wanted to confirm that all the commissioners are on board with it.
Yes, I think
So
we said
that's
that at our last meeting.
Good. All right, and I don't think there's any new business. We had discussed having our next meeting for April 12th,